Mm. You did a good job today, by the way.
I always do.
Welcome to the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show, where hosts Brian Leverage and Jeffrey Holst pour our old fashioned real estate advice.
Welcome back to another episode of the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show. I'm Brian Leverage.
And I'm Jeffrey Holst.
And we're glad to be here with you again today.
We are actually. It's been way too long. Brian and I decided not to drink for 40 days.
Yeah.
That was crazy.
Which, when you've got a show called the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show and it sort of revolves around booze, to some degree, it makes it difficult.
Well, we do drink. And just to be clear, the 40 days is over, so we're good to go. Thank you for making me an old-fashioned. So if you don't know how to make an old-fashioned, we've actually already done a video on that, and you can check it out right there. All right, so we have an interesting topic for today. What happened is I was reading an online newspaper, CNBC. So if you guys are out there on CNBC and you want to sponsor our show, just saying. Anyway, so I was reading on CNBC, and I'll just tell you what it says. It says that there's been a spike in home sales. July home sales spike a record 24.7%.
Year-over-year number?
That's from the previous month, actually.
Okay.
So now part of that is obviously because of the coronavirus and sales being way down in June. Mm-hmm. But the other part, when you really dug into the numbers that I found interesting, was that the number of homes on sale, right, the number of homes on the market had fallen like 20% from last year at this time.
I'm talking about supply of houses.
Supply of houses, yeah. In fact, they said that supply last year was 4-point-some months of supply, and now it's down to 3.1 months of supply.
In a healthy market, just for context, is roughly about 6 months worth of supply.
Yeah,
sort of the national metric.
Well, actually, I think it's even more than that, because when we were doing the real estate classes for when I became a realtor, they said that a buyer's market would have more than 18 months of supply on the market, and a seller's market would be less than 10 months of supply. So we've been well into a seller's market for a long time, and that number continues to creep down and now is at a record low, and that's nationwide. What is it like here in Chattanooga, Brian?
Well, the trend is the same here as it is nationally. I mean, just in the last, I want to say since March, we've had about a 30% decline in inventory alone. So, which is kind of interesting because when you think about it, that sort of tracks right in with the coronavirus. And there's a few reasons for that. I mean, the first is that I think a lot of potential sellers are hesitant to list their home for a couple of reasons, right? The first is inventory is down, so they want to know that if they sell their house, they have a place that they can buy. But then that's complicated by the fact that listing their house and having strangers traipse through, they don't want to expose their kids or family members to any potential virus or illness, etc. So you're seeing a couple different reasons for why that continues to drop.
Right. So the demand has remained fairly static. It's down a little bit, but the supply is down dramatically, which is, of course, compressing.
And then the price is shooting up.
Oh, yeah. It's causing an insane situation where stuff locally is getting listed and then almost immediately selling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which, of course, has been like that already for a year, but now it's even faster. Like it used to be, you would list something and a couple of days later it would sell. And then January, you would list something and it would be like, you'd get a couple offers the first day. Now you're getting multiple offers almost immediately as soon as it hits the market.
Yeah, just on a personal note, I listed a house that was a flip for sale back in the beginning of July, and we listed it at $185,000, which was about $30,000 higher than what I expected to list it for when I bought it. And, one indicates just how crazy the market has gotten. Number two, what was even more interesting is that's in sort of our median price range here in Chattanooga where we film this. And when it hit the market on a Thursday evening, between Thursday evening at about 5 o'clock and about Saturday by 10 in the morning or noon, we'd had 32 showings, and there were already 3 offers by Friday night. So
And that kind of quick turnaround is really unheard of in the market, and that's actually what brings us to the topic of the show, which we didn't do a very good job of introducing the topic of the show. We just started talking.
You might have to edit that back in later. Yeah.
Well, I'm assuming they've read the description or the title of the show, which we haven't named yet. So if you see this before we put it out, you can give us title suggestions.
Yeah.
But the point of the episode is really to talk about whether or not it's a good time to be selling. And I think the short answer is yes. I mean, it's a seller's market. But how do you make that decision if you're in a house or if you have a rental house that you maybe had for a while and you don't really know what you're going to buy to replace it? How do you make that decision? And really, is it a good time to sell? This came up because I was talking to my mother who has a little condo that she's had for a long time, and she's thinking about selling it now. And I told her, absolutely, you should sell. And I think as a general rule of thumb, the way the market is, at least in Chattanooga and the other markets that Brian and I are tracking personally, it would be if you're on the fence about whether to sell or not, now is the time to sell.
Yeah, I mean, as is the old axiom in real estate, is it depends somewhat, right?
Of course,
but yeah, generally speaking, I agree with you. I still have some houses that were among the first investment properties I ever purchased over 10 years ago. And we're selling those now at projections that are well north of what we thought when we bought them, right? And so,
well, it's been 10 years, so
yeah, true. It's hard to predict that far out. To your point. But
even if you were looking at selling them last year and comparing it to now, they're probably up 15 to 25%, depending on where they're at. And that kind of 15 or 20% growth in 1 year is really, it's very unusual. And the last time we saw anything like this was 2006. Mm-hmm. It does not mean that we're absolutely moving to a crash. And we have a market cycle episode, which you can check out. I think it was episode 13. We'll put that up there. But that will maybe help you determine where we are in the market cycle. But the point is, definitely, if you're thinking about selling, the coronavirus is created a unique window in time where supply is really low. And so if you're thinking you were going to sell in the next year or so, you probably want to do it now.
Yeah, and to be clear, for purposes of this episode, we're really talking about investment real estate, right? I mean,
sure, but I think it might even apply to your own personal home. For example, my wife and I have a house where we, have a bit of equity, and now the value's gone up. And I've said to her recently, maybe we should consider selling our own house and renting someplace while the market sort of goes back to normal. So
I would rent to you guys.
I appreciate that. Thank you. We might rent to ourselves. I don't know how that works exactly, but maybe one of our apartments or something. But the point is that if you are, especially if you're maybe a listener or viewer and you're a baby boomer and you're thinking about retiring and downsizing sometime in the next 5 years, it might make sense to accelerate that plan and then put the money on the sideline, rent a place for a little while, and then move forward, with whatever you're going to purchase.
And the big difference between investment, rental single-family homes and owner-occupied homes versus other types of investment real estate, commercial, multifamily, industrial, is that housing values are determined from a comparable sales approach, right? So that's, all real estate cycles or asset types are cyclical in nature. However, houses, because there tend to be much more of them comparatively, etc., that's where you have an upper limit, I would say. I mean, over a very long hold time, prices will go up and up. But
they mirror over the long period. They pretty much mirror the inflation rate. Mm-hmm. There's tons of studies that show this. We actually had Harry Dent on our show, and he talked about this specifically. If you haven't seen that episode, it's right there. That's 3 in 1 episode. That's pretty good for us. But anyway, Harry Dent taught us that that over since before World War II, housing prices have increased at the rate of inflation. And what's happened right now is the rate of inflation has been very low the last couple of years, but housing prices have gone up faster than that, which means they're starting to spread out. And that's not unusual over the last 50 years. Many times, like 2006, prices went up faster than the rate of inflation. Then inflation continued to go up at the similar rate, and then houses went down, And when you draw that trend line,
It
they went up
averages.
above inflation, and then they went down below inflation, and then they went back up again. And they basically hit that average rate of inflation. So the argument now is for single-family houses, condos, stuff like that, single-family residences, they pretty much track the cost of creating them. The replacement cost matters in this stuff. And that's true of multifamily and commercial as well. But because income tends to go up and down relative to inflation, you don't have as big of a price swing that usually occurs in those. Now, there are differences, right? We can make arguments about whether commercial space is going to go down because of the coronavirus and stuff, but that's kind of outside of the scope of the video today. But the point is, if you're sitting on a single family house and you're planning on selling in the next couple of years, then you probably ought to sell. And if you're sitting on a single family house and you're not planning on selling, and you're going to keep it for 10, 15, 20, 30 years because you live there and you love it, it might be a good time to refinance. Because what's another thing that's driving housing prices up right now is
Rates are at historic lows.
money's below
All
3%.
time, right?
Yeah, my grandmother was telling me back in the late 90s when I first started thinking about real estate that she had this house that had a 4% rate, and her husband, who was then already dead about 15 years at that time, said, don't ever refinance this house because you'll never see rates of 4.25% again. And I thought that was true until I got a 3.95 rate on my house a few years ago. Then rates had gone back up for a little while. They've been hovering in the low 4s, high 3s for a long time. Coronavirus happened. All of a sudden, we're seeing rates below 3.
I saw a quote online today. It was 30-year fixed at 1.99.
That's insane. Below 2. Now, that might be an unusual circumstance. It might require you to pay some points or something like that, because the advertised ones aren't exactly. But if you go to like a bankrate.com or something like that, they can tell you what the average mortgage rates are, and they are hovering right at or right below 3 right now, which is unbelievable for 30-year fixed. And 15-year fixed are in the mid 2s.
Yeah.
So yes, if you're sitting on a bunch of equity and you don't want to sell, it might be the time to refinance. You did a good job today, by the way.
I always do.
Yeah, so anything else that you think we need to cover before we move on?
No, I think, as an investor or a homeowner, you need to be cognizant of the real estate cycle as it relates to single-family properties. And, realize that if we are in the late stages, which a lot of people suspect, and the late stages could mean it still has a few more years of up. We're not making predictions here on that. To be clear.
we've tried to make a prediction on it before, where we said we didn't a year ago, over a year and a half ago now, when we made our market cycle episode. We said we thought there was at least a couple years left. I think it's safe to say that we were right about that. But people then told us we were crazy and the market was going to crash any day. And I know people, I think you do too, that have been out of the market for 3 or 4 years. And I think that was a mistake. The market's been up like crazy. The thing I think is important when you're making these decisions about whether to buy or not is if it's your own personal residence, can you afford it? And are you going to stay there a long time? Because this stuff is forgiving over the long term. If you're going to live somewhere 10 or 15 years, the temporary up and downs really don't matter that much, as long as you can afford your mortgage.
But if, on the other hand, you've held for investment purposes and you're looking at it going, okay, things have appreciated substantially in the time, and plus you've got some equity pay down on the note and so forth, and you should look at things and maybe evaluate whether it's a good time to, it probably is a great time to sell, frankly. The question is, how do you deploy the capital? Which, again, is not what we're seeking to answer.
Yeah, if you're going to sell and you're going to move to a different house in a similar neighborhood and you're going to buy at the same price that you're selling at, there's no point.
It makes no sense.
Yeah, it makes no sense. On the other hand, if you're going to do like I said for my wife and I, which I couldn't convince her to do, maybe Brian will be more lucky in his life deciding these things. But for me, I'm unable to make that move. But if you're in a situation where you've had a house for 5 or 10 years, you have some equity build up, and you think, you know what, maybe we're going to move in a few years anyway, or we want a bigger house, why not sell now, rent for a year or two, and then redeploy the capital?
It's a lot easier to get out of a lease than it is a mortgage.
Well, and that's
especially
the other
if the
thing.
market turns.
If we're wrong, the way the market's been lately, and the market doesn't go down in the next several years, it's not like it's going to it's very unlikely to go up 20 or 30% a year every year. It's been up that this year. I don't think it will happen next year.
Plus, there's the old saying is that markets can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. So always keep that in the back of your mind.
I think that seems like a really good place to end this episode. So if you're enjoying our content, if you're listening to us on podcast, please rate and review the podcast, especially if it's Apple Podcasts. We need a whole bunch more 5-star reviews. And if you've listened this far, we know you love us, so give us a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and you haven't subscribed already, please do so. And in the meantime, enjoy your weekend, your days, whatever it is.
Cheers.
Be sure to drink some old fashions. And thank you.